Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to Faculty Roundtable. And tonight's topic is the life, beliefs, and dreams of China's President Xi Jinping. We are fortunate to hear from two experts tonight, from Dr. Ward, presenter, and host, Dr. Thomas Walsh. During the presentation, we mute your microphone, but you can freely put your questions and a comment on the chat. And later on, after the presentations, presenters and hosts will take your questions and elaborate. So for the price of one, we can get here from the two presenters. So Dr. Thomas G. Walsh is the 7th president of HJ, International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership, formerly Unification Theological Seminary. 1979 graduate of HJI, Dr. Walsh went on to earn his PhD at Vanderbilt University School of Religion, where he specialized in the study of religion and ethics. Since his graduation, Dr. Walsh has taught courses at a number of colleges and universities for a number of years, and is currently teaching a course, the United Nations and Civil Society at HJI. Dr. Walsh has worked closely with the HJI co-founders, Reverend Samuel Moon and Dr. Hakshan Moon, in the establishment and in the leadership of the Universal Peace Federation, where until recently he served as international chair. Dr. Walsh has edited more than 20 books and journal publications for the Universal Peace Federation, and he serves as the executive editor of Dialogue and Alliance, an academic journal indexed by the American Theological Library Association. Let's welcome Dr. Walsh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noda, our Vice Provost here at HJI. I just comment that we have a wonderful topic tonight by none other than Dr. Ward, but this faculty roundtable series has been quite stimulating and diverse, and I think kind of imparts some of the enthusiasm and excitement and kind of the what we call the HJI graduate school being a home of thought, that we hear a variety of perspectives and diversification of the fields. So we've had wonderful talks from Dr. Michael Mickler on church history and the implications of early church development and relevance to unificationism. We've had Dr. Andrew Wilson speaking on what we might call the first edition of Divine Principle that was handwritten by our founder and has invested years in its study and research and translation into English. And we've also benefited from Dr. Noda, who's introduced us to philosophical ideas and concepts. Recently, the thought of phenomenology and the work of thinkers like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, and that impact the area of philosophy of religion, but also theology in important ways. Dr. Kone, who's an expert on kind of religion and diplomacy, as well as leading our DMIN program. So it's just been a rich environment for me. I spent so many years kind of managing NGOs and yet having this great love for academia and intellectual thought and ideas. And I'm truly enjoying this opportunity, and particularly learning so much from our speaker tonight, Dr. Thomas Ward, who has both an enormously rich background in higher education over many decades, particularly at the University of Bridgeport. He was the vice president there and the founding dean of the School of Public Affairs and International Relations, and which was, in effect, the University of Bridgeport's program in peace studies as it was evolving. And now he's chair of the master's program in peace studies here at HJI, in addition to being our provost. Provost is a term that more or less means the vice president for our academic affairs, a critical role here at HJI as we develop. So I don't want to go on too much, but it's exciting to see. The seminary you could imagine as evolving into what we're now calling more of a divinity school. And this is a term that you may not be well acquainted with, but those of you that have studied at some of our major institutions know that schools like Harvard and Yale and Chicago and Vanderbilt and others, they don't have a seminary, they have a divinity school, which kind of functions as a seminary of sorts within a university context. So we keep and emphasizing that curriculum of church history, scripture studies, and having as a kind of companion or sibling this whole area of peace studies, which our founder's idea was to have a graduate school. So kind of moving in this expansion step by step. So it's an exciting place. And I think you're in for a treat tonight to hear from Dr. Ward. In addition to what I've mentioned earlier, he's been a Fulbright scholar in France. He did studies at the Sorbonne. He did his undergraduate at the University of Notre Dame, one of the finest academic institutions in America. Was a foreign ministry research fellow in Taiwan, guest lecturer at the Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing, and at the National Academy of Political and Strategic Studies in Santiago, Chile. He's an elder senior member of our unification community and really a mentor to so many students and many of us at HJI. So he's going to talk about a topic that any of us who are reading newspapers and watching news programs on television understand to be a major area of concern, and Dr. Noda alluded to this. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Dr. Ward. His presentation will kind of be divided into two parts. There'll be a short break where he and I will dialogue a little bit, then he will resume to conclude his presentations, after which we will open it up to wider discussions. And I believe, if I'm right, Dr. Noda, the questions will be presented in the chat. If I misstated that, please feel free to intervene and let the audience know otherwise about how to register their questions. So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Thomas Ward, the provost of HJI International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership. Dr. Ward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh, for your very kind invitation. It's really an honor to be here tonight with you and with Dr. Noda, and with all of you who have taken time to join us this evening to reflect on this very, very important topic. I'm going to be speaking this evening, as Dr. Walsh indicated, on the life, the beliefs, and the dream of Xi Jinping. And it's my hope that through tonight's presentation, we will gain greater insights into what's going on today in China, and also gain greater insights into what is the best way for us to respond to those developments. Hebei province is to the northwest, just to the northwest of Beijing. And following the Cultural Revolution, and then in the early 1980s, Hebei was looking to establish a partnership with an American state. And the state that they chose to partner with was Iowa. And it was based upon that they decided to send a delegation to spend a week in Iowa, in a city called 2 weeks in Iowa, in a city called Muscatine, Iowa. And that delegation had a variety of participants. One of them, a very young man by the name of Xi Jingping, who spent 2 weeks there and had a remarkable experience. He was charmed by Iowa, and the citizens that had a chance to interface were also charmed by him. This is the home that he lived in. You might say, gee, what a fancy home. But no, the reality is there were no hotels. All the hotels were booked. So what they did was they arranged for families to take people in to live with them. And Xi Jinping stayed in this house in Muscatine, Iowa. This is the bed that he slept in. They have a little bit of a memorial there. And this is a picture of the young Xi Jinping, who was one of the key civil servants in Hebei province at that time. This is Sarah Land, who had a chance to meet with Xi Jinping the first time in 1985. This is one of the reunions which took place in 2012, just when Xi Jinping was to assume, the central role in China. At that time, he was still a vice president when they had that meeting. And she told a story recalling that time, and she remembered that back then she had a red Cadillac, and that Xi Jinping had said, "Oh, can I drive that?" And she said no. And she said, with hindsight, she regretted it. She should have really given him an opportunity to drive the Cadillac. Xi Jinping returned in 2012 with gifts for friends, and actually, he established a very warm relationship with some of the citizens of Iowa, citizens of Muscatine in particular. One family, actually, the Dvorchaks, that's the home where he stayed in. He actually hosted a state dinner for them a few years back. And one of the sons there actually has worked for a number of years in China. So really, he built a warm relationship. Xi Jinping is the 5th leader of China. And health permitting, he's likely to remain in power until at least 2027. During that same period of time, we here in the United States have had 14 changes of government, and very possibly we'll have another one before 2027. Who is President Xi Jinping? Well, first of all, he is referred to in Chinese as a Daiji Jiang, which is a princeling, or in Korean we say Orin Seja. Seja means crown prince, actually. And he is born from one of the key figures in the Chinese Revolution. This is a picture of the very young Xi Jinping. This is his father, Xi Zhongjun, and he's pictured there with all of his family. And Xi Jinping was a key fighter during the revolution, and he was one of the key. He was located in Shanxi province, and that was one of the places where Mao ended up at the end of the Long March. And so he had a personal relationship with Mao Zedong, and it was considered as a key area during the period of the Japanese occupation of China. And this is a recent article in China Daily, of course, highlighting the relationship between Xi Jinping and Xi Jinping. This is a picture of Xi Jinping's father. This is a portrait, and he's speaking at an event. And if you'll see beside him is Deng Xiaoping. This is also another picture of him with the successor to Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin. So he was a major player in terms of Chinese political life. Then along came the Cultural Revolution in 1966. I don't have time to get into the background of the Cultural Revolution, but suffice it to say, many people who were involved as political leaders during that time, many important families, they found themselves imprisoned. They found themselves at the mercy of the Red Guard, the young people who had united around Mao to purify the Chinese state of any remains of bourgeois thought. And not only was Xi Jinping's father kind of banished and banned, but also he went through a humiliation. And the incredible thing is that he was denounced publicly by the party in the district where he was living, and his mother participated in that. She was required because she was also a significant party official. She also participated in the denunciation of her son. She had no choice in the midst of all that. And in the midst of the Cultural Revolution, Xi Jinping's elder sister, committed suicide because she had been so berated during the Cultural Revolution because of her father and because of her family. So he suffered. And Xi Jinping, he lived for 7 years in a yaodong, kind of like a cave dwelling in Shanxi province, the same place where his father had been active. He lived in those circumstances for 7 years. And finally, when his father was released from prison and was once again became a major player in China's politics, Xi Jinping also began to move towards the forefront during that particular time. He went on to study chemical engineering at Tsinghua University. And his father was particularly indebted to one figure, China's premier Hu Yaobong, who had been chosen as premier by Deng Xiaoping. He died in 1995 at the same time, 1989, just a few months before the Cultural Revolution. And he was actually the reason that all those people gathered at Tiananmen Square, because they lamented his death because Hu Yaobong was in favoring of a great liberalizing of the Chinese state. He wanted freedom of the press. He also didn't want to have just one strong leader. He wanted to have more of a coalition of leaders that would be guiding China as things went forward. So Hu Yaobong was later denounced in 1986 because of his efforts to have these reforms in the Cultural Revolution, and all the major leaders of the party denounced him except for one person, Xi Jinping's father, because his father was a man of principle and he couldn't forget what Hu Yaobong had done for him. And so therefore, for that reason, he was not among those who participated in the lambasting of Hu Yaobong. This is a picture of Xi Jinping with his brother, with his father, and with his mother. His mother, of course, lamented what she had had to do with her son. She even wrote a book talking about the way in which her husband had wrongly been accused. And Xi Jinping was a loyal filial son, if you will, to both his father and his mother until the end of their days. Xi Jinping's father died, I think, around 2005. So this is something of a background of the fellow that traveled to Muscatine, Iowa in 1985. These are some of the things that impacted upon him. But Xi Jinping did not decide to become a dissident. Instead, he decided, in spite of everything that happened, that he would be, as someone put it, redder than red. He decided to embrace communism. And when he became the leader of China in 2012, he called for study everywhere of Marxism. The key underpinnings of Marxism, every single one of them, labor theory of value, theory of surplus value, dialectical and historical materialism, all of these areas, when we examine the writings of Xi Jinping, we find out that he endorses all of them. And not just that, but he often has shared a rather strange story in paying homage to Chen Guangdao. Chen Guangdao is the person who translated the Communist Manifesto from German to Chinese. And this is a story that Xi Jinping often shares. In 1920, young Chen started translating the groundbreaking work by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in his home village in East China's Zhejiang province. One day, Chen's mother made him sticky rice dumplings, or zhongji, and suggested he dip them in brown sugar water. I did so, and they were very sweet, Chen said. But later, his mother found that his mouth was covered with ink. It turned out that Chen was concentrating so hard on translating that he dipped the dumpling in ink rather than brown sugar water. It was with such dedication that Chen finished the translation and introduced the principles of Marxism into China, which paved the way for the birth of the Communist Party of China. Xi likes to share Chen's quote, The taste of truth is so sweet. So sweet. From the Communist Manifesto. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. Or furthermore, from the Communist Manifesto, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. One more. The communists turn their attention chiefly to Germany because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization and with a much more developed proletariat than that of England was in the 17th and France in the 18th century. And because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. An immediately following proletarian revolution? Did that ever happen? It didn't happen. So the truth that supposedly was so sweet, it didn't come to pass if one uses the Communist Manifesto as the criterion for that. In 2018, China honored the 200th birthday of Karl Marx, and that was led by President Xi Jingping. And he gave a speech. Actually, that speech is available on YouTube. You can see it. It's over an hour long. And in the speech, he makes this observation. Today, we commemorate Marx to pay tribute to the greatest thinker in human history and to declare our firm belief in the scientific truth of Marxism. So Marx was a greater thinker than Confucius or Mencius, Socrates, Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine, Descartes, Franklin, King, Hegel, Kant, Einstein. According to this quote, it would seem that that's what is being said, that he was the greatest thinker of all of these. And President Xi Jinping speaks about a firm belief in the scientific truth of Marxism. So let me stop there, Dr. Walsh, and we'll go on from here afterwards to part 2 regarding Xi Jinping's dream.
Well, fascinating, Dr. Ward, and thank you for investing so much time even in the photo images, which really help. Unrelated, when you talked about his time in Muscatine, and you mentioned one of the families, the Dvorak, Antonin Dvorak, the famous composer who wrote the New World Symphony, spent a lot of time in Iowa. So when you mentioned that name, Dvorak, I thought immediately of the great composer who came to America and kind of found his voice as a brilliant composer. But that's a bit off track. Anyway, just picking up on the Marx, one thought I have is, did you ever feel that there's a certain kind of irony that we have in Xi Jinping's thought, the kind of importance of China and indigenous Chinese values, and even to the extent that there aren't universal values, like universal human rights, are not strongly subscribed to, that things are more tradition and community based, and yet there's this irony of what's, some refer to the colonialism of thought, that it's not just imposition by invading and residing and controlling a country, but that ideas are colonial. So I'm just curious how a German ideology could take such root. Have you ever given much thought to that, or is there any embarrassment about that among those who are strongly advocating the roots? Because it seems like North Korea has kind of not been as respectful of Marx and Lenin, but kind of paved its own path Duchesne's ideology?
Well, in a sense, I mean, that's a very good question, Dr. Walsh. And actually, we could spend the rest of the session just, I think, you and I talking about that particular observation. But it's interesting because I think that if we study the evolution of the thought of the of each of the five Chinese leaders since 1949, we find that each of them brought kind of their own brand, if you will, which kind of set it apart from Marxism. You know, Mao Zedong, he spoke a lot about the century of humiliation and the need for vindication. He saw Marxism as the way to somehow overcome the I'm going to talk a little bit about that next, but he talked about overcoming that, and he referred to his approach to Marxism as cynicized Marxism. He was very proud of his contribution to Marxism. As a matter of fact, when after the October 1949 revolution, he traveled to Moscow to meet Stalin. He spent about a month in Russia, and was not really very well respected by Stalin. He was, in many ways, he was kind of disappointed because he had done an incredible thing. He had succeeded in turning, you know, the most populous nation in the world over to communism. And Stalin didn't pay him the respect that he anticipated, you know, but still, I mean, his feeling was, hey, I've done something, and what I brought, my mode of revolution is something very new that you have to learn about. People have to understand, and so there was this strong sense about that. And likewise, you know, when Khrushchev assumed power, Mao's attitude was a little bit like, "What, you? No, if we're truly international, then I should be the next leader. What are you talking about? People should be paying attention to me." And Deng Xiaoping, I mean, he had survived the Cultural Revolution, and somehow he had this idea, first of all, that Marxism by itself was not enough. He had that view. And he had this idea also, black cat, white cat, it doesn't matter so long as it catches mice. But at the same time, he was very, very clear that the ultimate agenda was Marxist, no question about it. And there's a remarkable speech that reveals this so clearly, which he delivered on June 9th, 1989. He spoke to the generals that had been involved in the Tiananmen crackdown. And if you read that speech, you understand it's very clear that Deng Xiaoping had a very strong Marxist focus in everything that he was doing, no matter what, even though people didn't believe that. Oh. And Jiang Zemin, he was proud of what he called the three represents. And one of the most important was he wanted to emphasize the need to take care of all the people. By the way, that's one thing which is quite laudable about China's accomplishment. More than 50% of China's people nowadays are part of the middle class. That's quite an achievement, you know.
Yeah.
And Hu Jintao, he emphasized like this scientific mode of development, emphasizing the scientific dimension. And then Xi Jinping brings us to a new level of socialism with Chinese characteristics, a term that came first of all from Deng Xiaoping, but he introduces it and he brings it to a new level. And one of the reasons why I think he's so reliant upon Marxism is because that's the area where he's an expert. He's not an expert on Confucius or Mencius or, you know, the Qing dynasty. He's an expert on Marxism, and that's the basis upon which he derives his authority.
Well, it's definitely very helpful to get this background. And just another follow-up thought. You mentioned the Cultural Revolution, and this in the 60s. It's interesting when we talk about the West, we often talk about the 60s, and many look back at whether on the left or the right, they see that as a central inflection point or pivot point in some kind of new direction. And I'm just wondering how significant is the Cultural Revolution in, let's say, the history of modern or communist China, particularly since the founding of the People's Republic of China?
Actually, it's a key reference point in China. First of all, the Cultural Revolution was the way in which Mao was able to regain power, because Mao had initiated in the 1950s the Great Leap Forward. And he somehow put forward this idea that China was going to be able to surpass the economy of Britain in a period of 5 years. And he wanted to try to industrialize very quickly. He had people on a local level supposedly smelting steel and really just very quickly he wanted to see China become mechanized. And to take care of all these processes, he likewise communized all the farming and created these community farms, communes, if you will, everywhere. And a very quick change and a drastic collapse of the whole agricultural domain in China. 40 million people died as a consequence of those initiatives taken by Mao. And he was forced to step down because of that. And it lasted for a few years. He was replaced by Xi Jingping, by Li Shaoqi, and also by Zhou Enlai. The three of them they were leading, and Mao had to find a way to return. And the way that he was able to return was to emphasize his ideology, his teaching, and the need to purify China. And he called, the young people, appealed to them. We have to do something about the leadership, what's going on in China, because they're taking us back towards bourgeois thinking. We have to change all that. So this was an incredible thing. It took not 40 million lives, but about 1 million people were died during the Cultural Revolution. There's all kinds of things on YouTube about like children still filled with regret because they turned their parents over as traitors and therefore they were killed by the Red Guard. Just incredible things. But one of the most important things that happened during the Cultural Revolution is that Mao wanted to prove that Marxism was right. And so the way that he attempted to do this was that he got students, people who were in the major universities in China, to leave the universities and to go and participate in factory work. Because according to Marxism, the way in which the human brain develops is by interfacing with tools. And so there was particularly one model group that was called the Shanghai Machine Tool Factory. There's all kinds of stories about the Shanghai Machine Tool Factory and all the incredible inventions that they were creating, and how this was so hopeful because they were interfacing with tools, and therefore all kinds of inventions were coming. And eventually that all fell apart. I actually wrote a chapter of my doctoral thesis dealing with that chapter in Chinese history. And a number of years ago, I had a chance to go into China and to visit the Shanghai Machine Tool Corporation. By the way, they also have a branch in North Carolina, I think, here in the United States. So I went in, and this was in 1989 and 1988, just before. So it was a liberalizing period. So I thought I went in and I visited, and they thought I was like a representative of an American company and things. And I went in and I said, I just want to know if I could talk to somebody about the whole Cultural Revolution and the Shanghai Machine Tool Factory and how that developed and the relationship between that and your company. Well, I was escorted to the gate in about 2 minutes. That was the end of that. I never had a chance to find out, but it's an incredible story, and to find out the things that transpired during that period of time. The point is that all of the leaders since then have understood, no, forget about the tools and interface with tools. We need the most developed productive forces around. Our kids are going to university in Europe, in Japan, in the United States, and we are going to do everything to have the productive forces. And that has been the lesson since then. Deng Xiaoping started it. And if you look at Xi Jinping's speeches today, it's still the same, hasn't changed.
Well, I think I need to let you get back to part 2. I have more questions, but this is so fascinating. And I want to let you continue, and then we'll come back in about 12 minutes.
Sounds good. Very good.
More discussion and open it up more widely.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, Xi Jinping's dream. This actually references some of the things that Dr. Walsh touched upon. We'll see. Xi Jinping's dream is what can also be called the China dream. And he first addressed this in a speech that he gave November 29th, 2012, talking about achieving the rejuvenation of the Chinese people. We'll get into that again in a little bit. But he speaks, as Dr. Walsh mentioned, about his love for what's great about China. China is a great people with a civilization and a history that is several thousand years old. The Chinese people are a great people who created a splendid culture, and the Chinese nation is a great nation inspired by the spirit of constantly seeking self-improvement. During the protracted course of history, the Chinese people surmounted countless difficulties and obstacles and created one miracle after another for this world through hard work and arduous pioneering work. I think that those of you who know Chinese characters know that basically Zhongguo, or Zhongguk as we say in Korean, basically it's the Middle Kingdom. China was the center of the world. And Marco Polo, we know that in his travels, he wrote about the things that he discovered in China. He said that the iron manufacture was about 125,000 tons of iron a year. This is back what we're talking about the 14th century. He said salt production was on a prodigious scale, 30,000 tons a year in one province alone. He talked about a canal system. He talked about paper money and porcelain bowls. And he said, they wear silk garments and live as did no Europeans. He was amazed by this. And in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith also comments on the great development of China, although he recognizes that it's stagnated. He said, China has been long one of the richest, that is one of the most fertile, best cultivated, most industrious, and most populous countries in the world. It seems, however, to have been long stationary. And then he adds, China, however, though it may perhaps stand still, does not seem to go backwards. Its towns are nowhere deserted by their inhabitants. The lands which had once been cultivated are nowhere neglected. The same or very, very near the same annual labor must therefore continue to be performed, and the funds destined for maintaining it must not consequently be sensibly diminished. So he talks about that still this was continuing, you know. What China did not understand, what the Qing dynasty did not understand, was that in the 18th and in the early 19th century, because of developments such as the Napoleonic Wars, Europe became highly sophisticated in warfare. And as they reached out to China, to India, and to other countries because they wanted to open up markets, they were strong. They said that somehow if countries didn't open up their markets, they would open them. The Qing emperor was very confident that somehow things were fine in China and that they would be able to stand up against any European force because he didn't understand what had happened in the 18th and early 19th century. The first Opium War took place in 1842. There were 69 British casualties in that war. There were 18,000 Chinese. And at the Treaty of Nanjing, it was a humiliating treaty where basically China had to agree to turn Hong Kong over to Great Britain, but not only turn over Hong Kong to Great Britain, but also they had to agree that if a British citizen committed a crime in China, the principle of extraterritoriality prevailed, meaning they could not be tried by a Chinese court. Instead, they would be tried by a British court. This period, 1839 to 1949, when Mao's revolution occurred, is referred to by Mao. First, he coined the term the century of humiliation. And that is a term that has a great impact upon all Chinese. You know, it's a very, very powerful, we have to get through this century of humiliation. And President Xi feels that this includes vindicating the past 170 years of Chinese history, becoming whole. Taiwan has to come home. Hong Kong has to come home. Macau has to come home, plus maybe a number of other things we're discovering more and more. Much of the South China Sea, the the Diaoyu Islands, I forget what they're called in Japanese, Senkaku Islands in Japan, all those things have to be returned. And it's important, now this is important, that China has to secure the economic well-being of China's citizens. As I said, more than half of them are middle class. So, you know, if you go to China, you're going to see beautiful cities, you're going to see beautifully dressed people, you're going to see many things that are admirable. And you can do almost anything in China except for two things, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because of the way that things are set up. He wants China to become a world economic power, which it has become, a formidable military power, which it has become. He wants to establish regional hegemony, at least in the Asia-Pacific region. He wants to become the nexus for development in the developing world through his Road and Belt Initiative. And he wants to build a new world order with China at the center. And he wants to establish a model of socialism led by the CPC. And eventually he wants to attain real communism. Socialism is not real communism. Communism is the final stage, according to Marxism. Often, Xi Jinping makes this observation, and we have to understand what's behind it. He says, the modern world is experiencing great changes unseen in a century. What President Xi is referring to is that at the start of the 20th century, there was a change of hegemony. The United Kingdom was replaced by the United States as the principal world power. And today in the 21st century, there's a new change of hegemony, and the United States, and many Chinese will be very open about that. The expectation is for the United States to be replaced as the central power by the People's Republic of China. Now, President Xi has a number of challenges to his dream, and he recognizes them. In a speech which he delivered in 2019 called Uphold and Develop Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, he said, for a fairly long time, socialism in the primary stage will exist alongside a more productive and developed capitalist system. He says it, a more productive and developed capitalist system. In this long period of cooperation and conflict, socialism must learn from the boons that capitalism has brought to civilization. We must face the reality that people will use the strengths of developed Western countries to denounce our country's socialist development. Here we must have a great strategic determination, resolutely rejecting all false arguments that we should abandon socialism. And he also goes on, though, to say, facts have repeatedly told us that Marx and Engels' analysis of the basic contradictions in capitalist society are not outdated, nor is the historical materialist view that capitalism is bound to die out and socialism is bound to win. This is an inevitable trend in social and historical development, but the road is tortuous. The eventual demise of capitalism and the ultimate victory of socialism will require a long historical process to reach completion. So he sees this in the long run, and he sees ups and downs along the way. Now, some ask the question, why is China lately cracking down so much and in many different places? These are photos, of course, from Hong Kong. The roots of this, I think, can be traced to socialism with Chinese characteristics. Deng Xiaoping, way back in 1977, 78, 79, following the end of the Cultural Revolution, looked at the world around him, and he looked at his neighbors. And what he saw was that South Korea, a military dictatorship, and Taiwan, a military dictatorship, had somehow made a strategic decision to open their economies. And the consequence of opening their economies is that their economies had just gone through incredible growth, an incredible level of development. And Xi Jinping thought, why not China? Why can't we do exactly the same thing? Now, in the case of South Korea and Taiwan, we know that once those countries became economically prosperous, they likewise eventually became democratic and had democratic elections. But in the case of China, that was also the expectation that was what was going to come to pass. But there was a close associate of Xi Jinping by the name of Chen Yun, also one of the key figures in China's development in the 1970s. And he talked about establishing a bird cage market economy. And what that meant was the market economy is like the bird. You keep it in the cage. You know, you don't let it just out. It has to stay in the cage. It has to be very, very tightly controlled. And we can see that that's particularly being enforced today. Deng Xiaoping back in 1989 unleashed Chinese forces in Tiananmen Square because he saw a threat to the ongoing control of China by the Chinese Communist Party. And we saw something very similar happen back in 2021 in Hong Kong when voices of dissent rose up. And more than 10,000 Hong Kong residents ended up in prisons as a consequence of that particular attempt to really want to guarantee a democratic future for Hong Kong. So the democratic future that emerged from the authoritarian economy and the authoritarian political state, but the democratized economy in South Korea and Taiwan is not part of the agenda of what's going on in China. The plan is that it has to stay in the hands of the state. So there is an emphasis on the pivotal role of Marxism in all the things that are being done in China. There has been a consolidation of the dictatorship of the proletariat. If you read President Xi Jinping's speeches, he talks over and over and over again about the need to support the central leadership of the Communist Party. And there's growing party control of industry. That's another interesting topic that we could get into, but how that happened. But anyway, there's growing party control. And also it's potentially the case that President Xi has shown overreach into the Americas, Africa, and the Asia Pacific with some of his initiatives in those parts of the world. And there has been some backlash, you know. In a speech that he gave in 2021, he did praise, however, let's say leaders that had more of a liberalizing tendency. He mentions Zhou Enlai, Liu Shaoqi, Zhu Dei, Deng Xiaoping, Chen Yun, all of whom were victims of the Cultural Revolution. But there are merits that clearly Xi Jinping sees in all of them. And under his leadership, as I said, more than 50% of China's citizens have attained middle-class status. There's only two things that those people can't do. Sexually explicit materials are prohibited in publicly accessible media, which I think we all agree is a good thing. And also, there is no criticism of the top party leadership that's permitted. Maybe a little bit, but beyond a certain level, there's definitely going to be consequences of that. And lots of people have had their fates changed because of daring to speak up against the principal leadership. And in his speech of November 29, 2012, he makes this observation. I just picked out this one paragraph. History shows that the future and destiny of each and every one of us are closely linked to those of our country and nation. One can do well only when one's country and nation do well. Achieving the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is both a glorious and arduous mission that requires the dedicated efforts of the Chinese people, one generation after another. In other words, what he's talking about really is, let's make China great again. That's what he wants to do. He wants to make China great again. He wants to go back to the way that China was that central kingdom, if you will, the reference point for the world. He wants to see that happen again. Xi Jinping's leadership is highly authoritarian. There has been a centralization of power using Marxism and Xi's expertise in Marxism, as well as a demonizing of the United States as a rationale for many of the moves that he takes. And it has begun to generate ill will towards China. I'm sure many of you have read or are familiar with Michael Pillsbury's The 100-Year Marathon. Michael Pillsbury makes an honest confession. He says, hey, I used to be a panda hugger. He speaks fluent Mandarin, and he served in 8 administrations. And he was just shocked every time he went to China. He had this great love of China, but he heard like it from, in lecture halls and in discussions and things that constantly the United States was being demeaned and being presented as, as the bad guy, when actually the will of the United States was for China to succeed. And he went through an about face, and he lost that faith that he had towards China in the past, and has become highly suspicious of China's motives as a consequence. Not only that, but also the nation in the world which has seen the largest exodus of millionaires over the past few years has been China. In 2022, 13,500 Chinese millionaires were expected to leave the country, and then the year prior to that, 10,800 high net worth individuals migrated out of China. So his militant actions have caused concern among democratic countries and its neighbors, who have become concerned because of China's activities, most notably but not exclusively in the South China Sea. Countries like Australia, India, the United States, Japan, the Philippines have all expressed concern about the claims to virtually 80% of the South China Sea by China, and which has lately been very strongly articulated, even with the building of islands and the large naval presence there by the People's Republic of China. What can we do? Well, I am not in a position to offer any kind of a universal response, but I want to make a few suggestions. First of all, China has prided itself upon its 5 principles of peaceful coexistence: mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and ultimately to produce peaceful coexistence. But I just want to turn attention to one of these. China's not living up to its principle. We know that China has police stations in the United States. In New York City, there's a 6-story building which is located in Lower Manhattan, in Chinatown, where they are monitoring, people of Chinese origin. This is an internal affair of the United States. It's not an affair of China, what those people are doing. There's no reason to be doing that. So they're violating their own principles of peaceful coexistence. Likewise, the Confucius Institutes that have been so active in universities across the United States have been cited in many places and closed at a number of universities, including the University of Chicago, because they've attempted to hamper free speech. Somebody puts up a poster for a free Taiwan, and it gets torn down. By whom? By somebody from the Confucius Institute. So there has been a reaction to these types of things. But the point is, China should stick to its 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Secondly, we have to recognize the impact of the ongoing transfer of wealth from the United States to an ill-intended China. They are building their military. This graph shows the incredible level to which they are building their military. And by the way, by the middle of the next century, of the next decade, their military expenditures will exceed those of the United States. And there are so many flashpoints where there can potentially be conflict. And very quickly, there is a willingness, it seems, on their part to act in those types of circumstances and cases. So we have to really think about this, when you buy things, we need to recognize that we are transferring wealth from the United States to an ill-intended China. Now, if China can change its intentions, if it can become a friendly neighbor, it should assume a top role in the world, maybe the top role in the world. That's not the issue. But it's not. Its principles right now are misguided. And so we need to recognize the need for merchant consumer awareness of the country of origin of our purchases. And that's not happening in the United States. Online purchases in particular. If you try to buy something from Amazon or Target, have you noticed that if you check the country of origin, instead of saying where things are made, what they put is imported? That's not fair. People should be made aware, and these people should not get away with just doing something like this. That we should be aware of where things are made, and that should be more clear. So that's something we can push through. Also, we need to respond to Xi's constant use of Marxism as the prevailing thought of the future. We know that that's not true. And there is the need to revive the teachings of Father Moon and Mother Moon dealing with the problem of communism. Dialectical and historical materialism is categorically not true. And also Marxist political economy based upon labor is categorically not true. And those of you who are familiar with the teachings developed by Father and Mother Moon on these topics, they are so clear. And we should remind President Xi Jingping of his speech of October 26, 2022, where he said, and I've already read the speech, so I'm just going to go to the last line. Here we must have a great strategic determination, resolutely rejecting all false arguments that we should abandon socialism. Well, let's call him on that statement. Because in reality, we're not talking about false arguments about abandoning socialism. We're talking about true arguments, true arguments that really come from true parents and have made a huge impact in many nations around the world. And they once again really have to make an impact today as we interface with China. So we need a positive response to President Xi's nationalistic and paternalistic, ostensibly retributive dream. And I believe that a lot of that response can be found in the organization that Dr. Thomas Walsh worked with for so many years, the Universal Peace Federation. We need to share in America, in China, and in the world the vision of Father and Mother Moon for a future world characterized by interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. And True Mother really gave a beautiful vision to China a couple of years ago about a way in which China could make an incredible contribution to the world. She spoke about the Gobi Desert. Look at the Gobi Desert, that tan spot there on that map. It's larger than most countries, and it's barren. And what Mother Moon said is, I want to say the following to China. With its population of 1.3 billion people in China, which has an incredible population and a vast territory, I hope that the Gobi Desert can be turned into a pristine forest by using the latest technologies and using national assets to prevent the further expansion of the Gobi Desert. If the desert could be turned into a forest, what a great blessing for humanity this would be. That would be a very exciting project that she has proposed. And if China can do that in the Gobi Desert, it can do that in deserts all around the world. Look at the Sahara and other things. So really, this is a beautiful challenge, and it's a beautiful way for China to really make its mark as a country that, first of all, addresses its own desertification, and then shows a way to do the same in other parts of the world. And I'm not saying that's the only thing. There's so much that China can bring to the world. China has a great civilization. It's a great people. It's a hardworking people. It's a blessed people. And our hope really is that somehow it can understand that that potential can be unleashed if it reaches out to more partners. And I think that UPF is one partner that can make a profound contribution to China going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. This was brilliant and captivating, and I think no timelier topic for us to focus on. And I think you pointed to the fact that China has advanced economically, has embraced a kind of market model to a certain controlled extent, and on that foundation is advanced militarily. And in the past, particularly as we saw the decline of the Soviet Union, there was the idea that communism could neither flourish economically nor, as a result, militarily. But we're seeing this new model where you have economic power, military power, but an aversion to Western liberal democracy, and therefore these autocratic or authoritarian forms of one-party rule government. And there's a fear that this is a model that is attracting attention of many countries, even in the developing world. And the recent meeting of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, including Saudi Arabia. And some of this is related to the human rights agenda that has been prominent in the West, even going back to President Carter. And it was viewed as Western imperialism, and the debate between the individual rights related to liberty that the West advocated and the more social and economic and collective rights that the Soviet Union at that time and indeed China have advocated. Anyway, there's so much to say and so much you brought out, but maybe just a little more. I love that you ended on a more ironic, that we can indeed, through this kind of soft power approach, through the work of organizations like the UPF and Women's Federation, can work dialogically. And that has been Father Mother's Moon strategy, even with North Korea, which arguably also has many traits that we might find reprehensible, but still trying to dialogue and work toward, at least on the non-governmental level. So maybe I'll just, before we turn to the chat, just ask about this. Is the West on irreversible decline, and this 100-year marathon that Michael Pillsbury has talked about in his best-selling book. There's a recent book by Jacques Martin of Random House titled "When China Rules the World: The End of the Western World and the Birth of a New World Order." These kind of books are proliferating, the decline of the West. And so I'm just wondering, part of it is how the West relates to China, but is the West on a trajectory of irreversible decline? Its time is up. And, there is this historical determinism that you referred to in Marxism, and that is there in the quotes you cited from Xi Jingping, the inevitability of the disappearance of capitalism and the emergence of this communist more utopia. How do we turn around the West as well as relate responsibly with China?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Dr. Walsh. And I actually feel that this is one of the main things that Father and Mother Moon tried to do during all their years here in the United States. Because what they kept on saying over and over again is, live for the sake of others. America has to live for the sake of others, has to provide leadership for the sake of others. I still remember one time being with True Father. Actually, it was in Danbury Prison. And I was there, and I was with two individuals, distinguished leaders, one of them from Latin America, another from Europe. And Father spoke particularly to the Latino leader. And he said to him, I don't understand what's going on with Latinos in the United States, because you should be thinking about your countries in Latin America. You shouldn't just be thinking about yourselves. And you should be working on getting the United States to pay more attention to what's going on in Latin America. That's really what your responsibility should be. We cannot deal with China by ourselves. The reality is, it would be, Father had this dream of AULA, the Association for the Unity of Latin America, and ultimately with the United States. I mean, the whole continent, so to speak, that should be brought together. And also the tie-in with Europe, and also so much emphasizing the unity amongst the United States, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and now also India. These countries, they have to be brought together, but they need to be brought together around certain values that somehow transcend nationalism, and hopefully can be able to likewise reach China, because these are people of conscience as well. They can be reached, so many of them. The question is not settled in China. There's a debate about which way China should go in the future, although right now it looks like the party has the upper hand. But there are many who are being quiet and waiting for their time and hoping for changes. So the point is, I think really we need a bigger vision, and we need an international coalition that are aware that we want to have a future based upon constitutional principles, democracy, and, as our founders emphasized, virtue. So universal virtue. We need these things all together, and that can make an enormous difference. I think that the United States has to realize we must reach beyond just ourselves. And thank you all for joining. I think that it's not a question just about the quality of the presentation. It's a question about the quality of the audience. So I thank all of you for joining tonight. I really feel blessed that you were with us today. Thank you all, and God bless you all.
Okay, Dr. Ward, thank you so much. Thank you for your passionate presentation, as passionate as a Communist Manifesto. And your questions and comments are taken seriously, and we will read carefully your questions. And many of your questions requires a series of thought and discussions. I can't answer in a short time. And if you are a graduate of HIJ or UTS, we welcome you to take 1 or 2 courses at HJI so that you can have a fruitful conversation on this hot, complex topic. And HJI is planning to have a series of faculty roundtable where faculty share his knowledge and experience and recent studies and findings. So thank you again for Dr. Ward and insightful comments to Dr. Walsh and hosting it. And thank you everyone who joined here. And without your participation, faculty roundtable is meaningless. And we really appreciate those who come on a regular basis. And we will see you again next month. Thank you. And thank you everyone who joined here. And without your participation, faculty roundtable is meaningless. And we really appreciate those who come on a regular basis. And we will see you again next month. Thank you.